James Stewart is universally celebrated as the quintessential American everyman, yet his ventures into the Western genre revealed a dark, deeply tormented dimension to his beloved persona. Stripping away his folksy charm, Stewart collaborated with visionary directors to forge some of the most visceral, psychologically complex films in cinematic history. These masterworks transcended mere shoot-'em-up pulp, evolving into harrowing meditations on vengeance, morality, and the unforgiving frontier. Ranked by their enduring impact, these 10 masterworks stand as an undisputed tour de force, illuminating Stewart's brilliant transformation into the definitive, deeply flawed hero of the American West. Number 10, The Far Country, 1954. In this harrowing journey into the frozen North, James Stewart plays Jeff Webster, a deeply cynical, fiercely independent cattleman who drives his herd into the lawless Klondike during the brutal gold rush. The narrative tension is intensely visceral, stemming from Webster's steadfast refusal to help anyone but himself, constantly clashing with a deeply corrupt, tyrannical local sheriff. Stewart delivers a brilliantly internalized, uncompromising performance, portraying a hardened survivor whose icy exterior slowly begins to crack. As the violence inevitably escalates and his closest ally is tragically murdered, Webster is finally forced to abandon his absolute selfishness, leading to a breathtaking, claustrophobic final shootout. The character details brilliantly showcase Stewart's mastery of the deeply flawed, deeply alienated anti-hero, creating a palpable, mounting dread as he ultimately confronts his own moral responsibility in an unforgiving wilderness. Directed by the visionary Anthony Mann, this masterpiece brilliantly transposes traditional Western motifs into a breathtaking, incredibly perilous glacial landscape. The production history is exceptionally notable for its grueling, magnificent location shoot in the freezing, awe-inspiring terrain of Jasper National Park in Alberta, Canada. Cinematographer William Daniels masterfully captures the stark, punishing beauty of the snow-capped mountains, perfectly mirroring the cold, isolated psychology of the protagonist. While not recognized by the Academy Awards at the time, the film holds immense historical significance for further cementing the legendary Mann-Stewart collaboration, which fundamentally darkened the psychological landscape of the genre. Featuring early, uncredited musical contributions from the brilliant Henry Mancini alongside composer Joseph Gershenson, the evocative score perfectly underscores the grueling, epic scope of this magnificent, icy tour de force. Number 9. How the West Was Won, 1962. Spanning several tumultuous decades, this breathtaking epic chronicles the perilous westward expansion through the deeply personal lens of the Prescott family. James Stewart anchors the ambitious narrative as Linus Rawlings, a fiercely independent, buckskin-clad mountain man who reluctantly falls in love with a pioneer woman. The sprawling plot generates incredible tension through a series of visceral, life-threatening encounters with treacherous river rapids, dangerous outlaws, and the absolute brutality of the untamed frontier. Stewart's performance is a brilliant tour de force of rustic charm and rugged survivalism, perfectly embodying the rugged, restless spirit of the early trailblazers. His poignant character details, from his rugged individualism to his profound, quiet devotion to his new family, ground the massive, multi-generational spectacle in genuine, harrowing human emotion, making the overwhelming scale of the frontier feel intimately accessible. Helmed by a legendary trio of directors, John Ford, George Marshall, and Henry Hathaway, this production is a monumental, undisputed triumph of Golden Age Hollywood scale. Its production history is intrinsically tied to its groundbreaking, incredibly complex use of the 3-strip cinerama process. An unparalleled team of masterful cinematographers, including William Daniels, Milton Krasner, Charles Lang, and Joseph Lachelle, miraculously captured the sweeping, majestic vistas of the American continent in breathtaking, panoramic detail. This unparalleled visual spectacle was rightfully rewarded at the Academy Awards, winning highly coveted Oscars for Best Original Screenplay, Best Film Editing, and Best Sound. Elevated by Alfred Newman's magnificent, iconic, and deeply sweeping musical score, the film holds profound historical significance as the ultimate, deeply romanticized cinematic monument to manifest destiny, preserving the mythic grandeur of the West. Number 8, Shenandoah, 1965. Set against the harrowing, blood-soaked backdrop of the American Civil War, this deeply moving narrative follows Charlie Anderson, a fiercely independent Virginia patriarch desperately trying to keep his large family out of the conflict. The dramatic tension is excruciating, born from Charlie's stubborn, isolationist refusal to choose sides while the devastating war violently encroaches upon his peaceful farm. Stewart delivers an absolutely towering, emotionally devastating performance as a deeply principled man whose desperate pacifism is shattered when his youngest son is mistakenly taken prisoner. The character details are incredibly rich. Stewart's transition from a booming, immovable patriarch to a heartbroken, desperate father searching the war-torn countryside is a profound tour de force. His visceral grief and undeniable gravitas anchor this tragic exploration of a family tearing apart under immense, impossible pressure. Directed with confident, sweeping emotionality by Andrew McLaglen, this deeply resonant film represents a significant thematic maturation for the traditional Western genre. The production history reveals a conscious effort to focus on the intimate, devastating collateral damage of war, rather than simply glorifying battlefield heroics. Legendary cinematographer William Clothier beautifully captures the lush, vibrant landscapes of the Shenandoah Valley, filmed primarily on location in Oregon, starkly contrasting the natural beauty with the horrific, encroaching devastation of the conflict. The picture earned a highly deserved Academy Award nomination for Best Sound, a testament to its immersive, chaotic battle sequences. Accompanied by Frank Skinner's deeply stirring, melancholic musical score, the film's historical significance lies in its poignant, deeply anti-war sentiment, heavily influencing subsequent generations and ultimately inspiring an acclaimed, Tony-winning Broadway musical adaptation. Number 7. Broken Arrow, 1950. In a deeply dangerous, racially volatile frontier, the plot follows Tom Jeffords, a brave former scout who decides to initiate an unprecedented, highly perilous peace dialogue with the feared Apache leader, Cochise. The visceral tension mounts as Jeffords navigates intense, deeply ingrained hatred from both the white settlers and the Native American warriors, constantly risking his own life to stop a relentless cycle of brutal slaughter. Stewart delivers a remarkably tender, profoundly earnest performance, shedding his traditional action hero persona to play a deeply moral, progressive diplomat. His tragic, forbidden romance with a young Apache woman adds an incredibly harrowing, heartbreaking dimension to his character. Stewart's absolute conviction and profound empathy create a magnificent tour de force, powerfully centering a narrative fraught with immense prejudice, profound violence, and the desperate, bleeding hope for coexistence. Directed with incredible sensitivity by Hollywood veteran Delmer Daves, this production is universally revered as a monumental, deeply groundbreaking milestone in cinematic history. The film's historical significance is absolutely undeniable. It was one of the very first major studio productions to offer a genuinely sympathetic, highly respectful, and profoundly humanizing portrayal of Native American culture. Its undeniable brilliance was recognized with 3 major Academy Award nominations, including nods for Best Screenplay and Best Supporting Actor. Masterful cinematographer Ernest Palmer gorgeously captured the stunning, rugged landscapes, beautifully framing the action with a majestic, respectful gaze. This visual splendor is perfectly matched by Hugo Friedhofer's magnificent, deeply evocative score, which deliberately utilized beautiful, gentle, pentatonic themes rather than relying on stereotypical, aggressive drum motifs, creating a truly magnificent, progressive masterpiece of the era. Number 6. Destry Rides Again, 1939. When a wildly corrupt, incredibly violent frontier town desperately needs law and order, they shockingly appoint Tom Destry Jr., a mild-mannered, deeply philosophical deputy who staunchly refuses to strap on a gun. The narrative tension is brilliantly, masterfully subverted, relying not on visceral shootouts, but on the excruciating suspense of watching a brilliant pacifist outsmart an army of ruthless, heavily armed thugs. Stewart delivers an absolutely radiant, deeply charming, and fiercely intelligent performance. He brilliantly underplays every single confrontation with a quiet, terrifying confidence, carving detailed character traits out of wood whittling and folksy anecdotes. His fiery, profoundly electric dynamic with a corrupt saloon singer generates immense, crackling chemistry. Stewart's portrayal is a pure tour de force of understated heroism, proving that true courage and absolute strength do not always require a loaded weapon. Directed with impeccable comedic and dramatic timing by George Marshall, this production stands as a brilliant, incredibly subversive masterpiece of Golden Age cinema. The production history is exceptionally notable for serving as a massive, career-saving comeback vehicle for Marlene Dietrich, effectively reshaping both her and Stewart's on-screen mythologies. Masterful cinematographer Hal Moore beautifully captured the chaotic, claustrophobic energy of the rowdy saloon sets, contrasting the wild brawls with tight, intensely intimate character moments. While a delayed premiere unfortunately disqualified it from the legendary 1939 Academy Awards race, its immense historical significance is cemented by its radical, brilliant deconstruction of the traditional, hypermasculine Western mythos. Featuring an incredibly lively, dynamic musical score by Frank Skinner and iconic, unforgettable songs by Frank Loesser and Friedrich Hollander, it remains an absolute foundational triumph of the genre. Number 5. Bend of the River, 1952. Leading a vulnerable, deeply desperate wagon train of pioneers through the treacherous Oregon Territory, Glenn McClintock is a hardened, deeply complex man desperately fleeing a violent, unforgiving past as a Missouri Raider. The visceral tension is absolutely agonizing, as McClintock and his settlers are mercilessly betrayed, left to starve in the freezing wilderness by corrupt, bloodthirsty prospectors. Stewart's performance is a terrifying, breathtaking tour de force. As the brutal winter closes in and his survival is threatened, the charming pioneer completely vanishes, replaced by a ruthless, incredibly violent force of nature driven by pure vengeance. His intense, agonizing character details, especially his deeply uneasy, mirrored relationship with a fellow former outlaw, create a harrowing, profoundly dark exploration of a man desperately fighting his own savage instincts to secure a peaceful, civilized future. Directed by the masterful Anthony Mann, this film is a brilliant, profoundly influential exercise in psychological darkness. The production history reveals a grueling, highly ambitious location shoot across the incredibly rugged, majestic terrain of Mount Hood and the Columbia River Gorge. Cinematographer Irving Glassberg utilized stunning, highly saturated Technicolor to brilliantly contrast the breathtaking, Eden-like beauty of the Oregon wilderness with the exceptionally ugly, deeply brutal violence of desperate men. Though unawarded by the Academy, the film's historical significance is immense. It fundamentally solidified the legendary Stewart-Mann partnership, permanently redefining the boundaries of the psychological Western. Supported by Hans Salter's incredibly opulent, dramatic, and sweeping musical score, the production forces audiences into a breathtaking, incredibly tense meditation on redemption, morality, and the heavy, bloody cost of frontier civilization. Number 4. The Man from Laramie, 1955. Driven by an agonizing, deeply obsessive quest for vengeance, mysterious stranger Will Lockhart arrives in an isolated, deeply paranoid New Mexico town, searching for the ruthless men who indirectly murdered his younger brother. The tension is incredibly visceral and suffocating, as Lockhart immediately and violently clashes with a powerful, deeply unhinged cattle baron and his fiercely sadistic son. Stewart's performance is an absolute terrifying tour de force of restrained, boiling fury. He portrays a deeply traumatized, utterly relentless anti-hero who suffers immense, harrowing physical and psychological abuse, including a famously brutal, agonizing encounter where he is dragged through a fire. Stewart's incredibly raw, painful character details expose a deeply wounded, intensely vulnerable man completely consumed by a dark, terrifying need for retribution, driving the narrative to a spectacularly dark, incredibly violent climax. Serving as the final, crowning Western collaboration between director Anthony Mann and James Stewart, this production is an undisputed, towering masterpiece. The production history is highly notable as Mann's very first venture into the magnificent CinemaScope format. Masterful cinematographer Charles Lang utilized this incredibly wide, sweeping aspect ratio to brilliantly isolate the agonizingly lonely protagonist against the vast, deeply indifferent, and beautifully rugged New Mexico landscapes. While completely ignored by the Academy Awards, the film holds immense, undeniable historical significance for perfectly distilling the psychological complexities of the era, pushing the genre into exceptionally dark, incredibly brutal, and heavily Shakespearean territory. Featuring an incredibly taut, evocative, and deeply dramatic musical score composed by George Dooning, the picture stands as an incredibly sophisticated, flawlessly executed, and deeply pessimistic pinnacle of 1950s Western cinema. Number 3. Winchester 73, 1950. Propelled by an incredibly violent, deeply personal blood feud, the narrative follows Lynn McAdam as he relentlessly hunts down a highly coveted, stolen rifle that passes through the desperate hands of outlaws, Indians, and thieves. The visceral tension is absolutely masterful, escalating rapidly as the prized weapon leaves a trail of pure, terrifying destruction across the treacherous frontier. Stewart completely shatters his wholesome, folksy persona, delivering a breathtaking, incredibly dark tour de force. He plays a deeply obsessive, violently angry, and profoundly broken man entirely consumed by his desperate need to murder his own brother. The terrifying, borderline psychotic character details he brings to the role, his cold, dead-eyed stares and sudden, explosive bursts of pure violence, create an agonizing, incredibly gripping portrait of a highly skilled killer driven to the absolute edge of madness. Directed by the visionary Anthony Mann, this profoundly important film single-handedly revitalized the Western genre for a more cynical, post-war audience. Its production history is highly significant, marking the very first legendary collaboration between Stewart and Mann, and fundamentally rewriting Hollywood business models by famously granting Stewart a lucrative percentage of the profits. Masterful cinematographer William Daniels employed stunning, high-contrast, deeply shadowed black and white photography to brilliantly emphasize the incredibly dark, intensely fatalistic, and deeply claustrophobic psychological themes of the narrative. Due to its undeniable historical significance and immense cultural impact, the film was rightfully selected for preservation in the prestigious National Film Registry. Accompanied by Walter Scharf's highly dynamic, deeply evocative, and thrilling musical score, this masterpiece fundamentally altered the trajectory of the American Western, introducing an era of terrifying, neurotic anti-heroes. Number 2. The Naked Spur, 1953. High in the treacherous, deeply isolating Rocky Mountains, a bitter, desperately poor bounty hunter captures an incredibly dangerous, highly manipulative outlaw, only to be forced into an uneasy alliance with two deeply untrustworthy strangers. The visceral tension is agonizingly sharp and incredibly claustrophobic, entirely driven by the captured outlaw's brilliant, terrifying psychological warfare as he slowly, methodically turns his desperate captors against one another. Stewart's performance is an incredibly raw, devastating tour de force. He portrays a profoundly traumatized, deeply broken man, completely paralyzed by his own moral compromises and violent past. The harrowing, deeply nuanced character details highlight Stewart's absolute descent into desperate paranoia, perfectly capturing a deeply conflicted soul violently wrestling with the heavy, corrupting nature of greed and the terrifying, brutal reality of treating a human life as mere currency. Directed with absolute, ruthless efficiency by Anthony Mann, this masterpiece is widely celebrated as one of the most intense, psychologically complex westerns ever crafted. The production history is exceptionally notable for its grueling, intensely physical location shoot in the punishing, majestic San Juan Mountains of Durango, Colorado. Brilliant cinematographer William Mellor gorgeously captured the incredibly rugged, violently beautiful landscape, which perfectly mirrors the exceptionally turbulent, deeply treacherous emotional states of the highly isolated characters. It earned a highly coveted Academy Award nomination for Best Original Screenplay, an incredibly rare and prestigious honor for the genre. Elevated by Bronislaw Kaper's incredibly tense, thrilling, and deeply atmospheric musical score, the film holds immense historical significance, earning a rightful place in the National Film Registry for its brilliant, completely uncompromising exploration of human depravity. Number 1. The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962. In an agonizingly tragic, deeply violent clash between law and absolute savagery, a highly principled, deeply idealistic lawyer travels west to bring civilization, only to be mercilessly terrorized by a terrifying, sadistic outlaw. To simply survive, the naive lawyer is heavily reliant on Tom Doniphan, a deeply cynical, tough-as-nails rancher who inherently understands that the brutal frontier only respects pure, necessary violence. Stewart delivers an absolutely brilliant, deeply poignant tour de force as the fundamentally decent but physically overmatched lawyer. His desperate, deeply visceral struggle to maintain his strong moral center in the face of absolute, terrifying brutality provides incredible, heartbreaking tension. The profound, tragic character details, his agonizing transition from an idealistic scholar to a deeply compromised, fraudulent politician, create a magnificent, incredibly dark exploration of the painful, violent death of the old frontier. Directed by the incomparable John Ford, this towering masterpiece stands as a heavy, deeply melancholy deconstruction of the entire American Western mythology. The production is incredibly significant for its deliberate, highly stylized use of stark, incredibly claustrophobic, black and white cinematography by William Clothier. Ford intentionally utilized this dark, shadowy, and completely unromantic visual palette to brilliantly underscore the film's immense philosophical weight. Widely adored by historians, it famously questions the very foundation of historical truth, famously declaring that when the legend becomes fact, one must print the legend. Featuring a beautifully understated, deeply elegiac score by Cyril Mockridge, this critical darling serves as Ford's brilliant, incredibly dark eulogy for the Wild West. Its historical significance is absolutely unmatched, utilizing Stewart's brilliant persona to flawlessly articulate the tragic, necessary triumph of civilization. These 10 remarkable films represent far more than a simple chronicle of an actor's career. They are the bedrock of the psychological Western. Through the brilliant, often harrowing performances of James Stewart, the American frontier was forever stripped of its innocent, matinee idol romanticism. By fearlessly exploring the deepest, darkest corners of human morality, trauma, and agonizing violence, these masterpieces elevated the genre into a profound, sophisticated art form. They stand as an enduring, undisputed tour de force, forcing us to relentlessly examine the heavy, bloody sacrifices and deeply flawed legends that ultimately forged the soul of a nation.